Okay, so I think we're live. We'll just give it a minute for people to join and then we'll get started.
First there was a silence followed by another silence. But the two were joined up. You couldn't notice the join.
Oh, there's a few people joining now. I can see the numbers going up a little bit. So just get ready in a minute. Right, it's 12 o'clock, so I think we'll get going. So hello everyone, I'm Laura. I'm Nutrition Manager at Burns Pet Nutrition, and today I'm here with John Burns and Stuart Phillips in conjunction with Wales Week. John Burns is a veterinary surgeon and founder of Burns Pet Nutrition, supplying natural and healthy diets for pets. And Stuart Phillips is the founder of BWY Canine, the leading supplier of specialist detection dogs in the UK and around the world. And they're also sponsored by us at Burns Pet Nutrition. So today we're going to be discussing all things puppy related, especially nutrition and behaviour. And we'll also have time to answer your questions at the end. So if you do have any questions, you can put them in the chat box and we'll pick those up at the end. And this will be recorded. So if you want to go back and check things later, or if you want to share it, please take a look at our Facebook page or YouTube channel. So, John, I think we'll just kick things off with you. Can you tell us a bit about your career and why you started Burns Pet Nutrition?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, thanks very much for that, Laura. Hello, everybody. Yeah. This goes back to the time I graduated. When I graduated, I came to Wales to work in a large animal practice in Carmarthenshire. I thought I would stay for a year. 50 years later, I'm still here. So I trained as an acupuncturist, and my interest in nutrition stemmed from studying traditional medicine. And I married up what I'd learned as a scientist and also as a learned about traditional medicine, came to the conclusion that one of the most important factors affecting health was nutrition. Initially, I told my clients in vet practice not to feed pet food, but to feed homemade brown rice, vegetables, and meat. People didn't really want to be doing that, so that's how Burns Pet Nutrition came about. Started off 1993, working in the house and the garage, children helping to unload lorries into the garage, and really that's how it all started. I thought we were going to be a sensation. A vet starts up his own pet food because he doesn't believe in what's on the market already. But it wasn't really like that at all. I find I had to plod around local shops and vets in West Wales and ask them to stock it. And for quite a long time, that was the extent of the business, fairly localised into West Wales. It took quite a wee while before we expanded into the rest of the UK.
So why was it, John, that you set up business in West Wales?
Well, that's where I lived, of course. I was told at the time that starting a high-end pet food in West Wales was not really the best place for it because it's not an affluent part of the country. But managed it in spite of that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And that was brilliant, John. Thank you. And Stu, can you tell us a bit about some of the things that you get up to with BWY Canine?
Yes, yeah. So I started my career over 20 years ago now. I always wanted to work with. I wanted to be a police dog handler, and my route didn't go according to as I wanted. Really, I started off as a special constable actually with Dyfed-Powys Police. And then a couple of years later, I joined the Ministry of Defence Police and Guarding Agency, and I managed to get onto the dog section. And as I say, that was I trained at the Defence Animal Centre, Melton Mowbray, in about, I think it was probably about 1998. And after about 12 years on the dog section, my career didn't. It wasn't really. It was quite sort of stagnant. So I made the brave decision to leave and set up my own little business. And yeah, BWY Canine. I'm still based in Pembrokeshire, but I was born and bred in Pembrokeshire. Still based here. And now I basically work with the police, with customs, with trading standards in the UK, and I work with dogs that I've trained to find drugs, cash, firearms, tobacco, and yeah, that's that. And I supply dogs as well to police and other agencies in the UK and abroad. So yeah, I'm a big dog lover. Love working with dogs, and very lucky to be working with Burns Pet Nutrition as well. So
yeah, we've got all things covered.
Sorry, can you tell us a little story about your detection work? Quite interesting, I think.
Yeah, well,
Give us an example, Stuart.
So, well, I mean, my current sort of detection work takes me all over the UK. Predominantly, this weekend, the weekend just gone, actually, I've worked with Kent Police for 2 days on an operation. So the dogs, the majority of the dogs that I've got here, I try and get my dogs from rescues or unwanted pets. So I mean, one of the first tobacco dog that I actually trained came from a rescue in Pembrokeshire. She's retired now, but some of the results that we've had, I mean, 2019. 2 of my dogs in total found £1.6 million in cash. And so for me, training dogs that were unwanted pets or were from a rescue, to be able to train them and have them now to assist police and trading standards and actually find illegal items, illegal tobacco and cash that's connected to crime there's no better job, personally. No, I've got loads and loads of stories.
It's fascinating, I think. Yes.
Yeah, there's so many stories about what the dogs have done, and every now and again the dogs will do something that amazes me. Even though, excuse me, even though I've trained them to do the job that they're doing, dogs being dogs, every now and again they'll amaze me and do something that I wasn't expecting and no one else was expecting. So, yeah, it is an interesting job, and yeah, I'm count myself very lucky. The only problem being based here in West Wales is, as I say, on the weekend I was in Kent, and people say to me, "Why are you based where you are?" Well, that's where my family is. That's where I live. So after yes, and after I might have 3 or 4 days in London, and it's always nice after 3 or 4 days in the city to actually come back to the countryside here in Pembrokeshire. So. Very proud. We've got a flag mast up outside with a Welsh flag up it. We're very proud to be Welsh.
Brilliant. So we'll get into a bit more into the puppies and puppy pandemic. So life's been quite different for all of us over the past year, and a lot of people have decided now's the ideal time for them to get a puppy or a new dog. It's been proven there's so many benefits to having puppies as well, and dogs, companionship and exercise. But what sort of problems have people been facing in the past year with their puppies due to lockdown measures? Have you seen anything cropping up quite often?
Well, Me or John?
Either of you.
I'll let
I
John
don't
go first.
I don't have personal experience of that, but I know that there's a danger that when puppies are kept in isolation for too long, rather than they really need to be socialised, and that's something that continues throughout their formative months, really. So almost from the time they're born. So if they're not able to mix with other dogs, then that can be a bit of a potential problem, I think.
Yes, I mean, I would agree with. I mean, John, just the vital word that John mentioned there was socialise. Now, we had a litter in 2019. We tend not to breed dogs. You know, as I say, we get them from rescues or unwanted pets. But you know, raising, particularly for what I do with dogs, we need dogs that are going to be bold and confident, and so socialization or environmental training, as we say it, is of a huge importance to puppies. You know, when they're from the day that they're born. And just to give you an example, you know, from the litter that we had here in 2019, we in our kennels we have speakers, and from day one they played music. They played the sounds of traffic, of city noises. So that's from day one, and as soon as we're able to, then the dogs, the puppies are taken out, and we get them to try and experience and as much as they possibly can, meeting people, walking on different floor surfaces, seeing buses, being in the town centre, and one of my worries about lockdown and people getting puppies in lockdown is that everybody's been told to stay at home, and environmental training for puppies is hugely important. They need to get out there and experience the world and meet people, and so that's one of my worries, is that we potentially going to be facing a lot of dogs that haven't done things that they would normally do in a normal year, without COVID.
Yeah, a lot of training classes are off at the moment, aren't they? And puppy training classes are so important. Something we've seen quite a lot on the helpline has been overweight dogs as well, not necessarily just puppies, but throughout lockdown, people have been at home more, spending more time with their dogs, giving their dogs tidbits. Have you got any sort of tips for those?
Well, it's a problem, I think, which affects not just dogs and puppies, but humans as well. If staying home and eating to pass the time almost. We don't have that problem where we live, of course, in West Wales. It's easy enough to get out and about. But overweight dogs has been a major problem for several years now. It's not a new phenomenon. And overweight puppies become overweight adults. And so it's a problem that needs to be avoided rather than have to be dealt with once it's occurred. So getting the feeding right from the beginning is an important element of that. So that can be quite difficult to do. Pet owners often look at the bag and it says, "Oh, it says I'm feeding what it says on the bag," rather than feeding for the needs of the individual puppy. And the puppies, we have to feed them enough for them to grow slowly and steadily, rather than grow rapidly and put on a lot of weight. If you put on weight too quickly, that can lead to skeletal joint problems. So there's always a macho thing about getting the puppy to grow fast, put on lots of weight, but it's not necessarily a good thing at all. Another problem that can be caused by giving too much food is behaviour issues, hyperactivity, excessive barking, and so on. That can be caused. It's a simple equation. Energy in can equal energy out, and so too much energy the form of too much food, especially high-fat food, means the puppy's got too much energy and it can become excitable, hyperactive even. So that's something to bear in mind, that there's a connection here between feeding and behaviour. Stuart will probably be able to say a bit more about that than I can.
Yes, I mean, as you said there, that feeding the right food and balance. As John says, it's not about what's on the bag. Well, it is about what's on the bag, but you have to tailor it to the needs of each dog, and different breeds as well. Yeah, again, one thing that I never want is an overweight dog. An overweight dog doesn't perform the task that you require of it. All of our search dogs, have to be quite agile, and they have to be, some of the dogs that that I have will be in a harness, perhaps working, searching, using their nose for maybe 3 or 4 hours a day, not continuously. And that's quite, dogs often obviously suffer from nasal fatigue. So we work our dogs generally for 20 or 30 minutes on and the same period of rest. So yeah, having the right food and a balance when working the dogs is really important for my dogs. Doing the job that I do, people are the general public are very, very quick to point at your dog and tell you that it's too skinny or too overweight. So not only do we have to make sure that the dogs look right and perform well, just for ourselves, but the public perception of our dogs when they're working with trading standards and police is also important. So yeah, the correct balance is really important.
Yeah, I find that a lean puppy or a lean adult dog is quite a rarity now. It stands out a little bit because most dogs tend to be overweight. I'm not sure I agree with you about I think I agree that you'll be, if your dog is thin, you'll have people telling you so in the street, but not if his dog's overweight. That doesn't happen the same, I don't think. It's an embarrassing subject, and so people don't talk about it. And it's becoming normalized, in fact. And being overweight it's a disease actually, and but it's one that doesn't get talked about. Even vets are embarrassed to talk about the subject. If your dog had kidney disease, the vet didn't tell you, then they'd be negligent. But if the vet doesn't tell you that your dog's overweight, that's actually being negligent too. But it doesn't happen. You see, it's a taboo subject. And overfeeding causes other disease problems as well, of course, arthritis, inflammatory disease, diabetes, and pancreatitis, inflammation of the liver, and so on. Also causes problems which are not necessarily so serious, but things like smelly dogs and shedding hair and so on. A multitude of problems caused by overfeeding. So don't get me started on that subject.
That's one for another day. Should we move on to choosing a puppy food? Because a lot of people find, how do you find a food for your puppy quite overwhelming. The breeder quite often has some recommendations and your friends and family. But what sort of things should people look out for, and any tips for them when feeding their puppies?
Yeah, well, when you look at the ingredients in the bag or the packaging, the ingredients should always be there by name. So, for example, say chicken, brown rice, and so on, rather than cereals, animal derivatives, and so on. For me, that's absolutely taboo. You should never select a food which where the ingredients are listed like that. And that tends to be the sort of thing that happens in the supermarkets with very popular brands. But for me, as I say, you should be able to read what you're actually feeding there. You shouldn't be kept in the dark. So although we're aware of the problem of overweight puppies and the problems that can be caused by them growing too quickly, for me, a lot of puppy foods have got quite high fat contents. And as I said, this is 20 to 30% fat, and this comes back to the sort of perception that your puppy should grow fast and grow rapidly and put on weight quickly. So I prefer our puppy foods tend to be much lower in fat, less than 20%. So I think that's quite important, really.
Can I just ask?
Whatever you feed, the puppy should be fed according to need, according to how they develop. That's a key factor there.
I was just going to ask him, because I can see one of the comments, someone's asking about diets high in protein, and there's some dogs that benefit more than others and at different times of life for different protein levels.
Well, growing animals, pregnant animals also, they need higher levels of protein than, say, an adult. But once you've met that basic requirement for protein, so for growth, reproduction even, once that need has been met, any protein consumed in addition to that is converted to an energy source. So it's not necessary to feed high. There is a trend towards very high protein diets, but that protein is basically not utilized as protein. It's turned into an energy source once the basic needs of the individual have been satisfied. So I'm not a fan of high protein diets. I think proteins fed to excess can cause health problems. Protein causes toxic waste matter like urea, and which is toxic and can affect the kidneys, I feel. So I've never been a fan of high protein diets.
Do you do anything different with your dogs, Stu, with them being working dogs?
Not really. No. What as I say, that our dogs are fed on burns, and the puppies, as soon as they've stopped, we wean them off their mothers with Burns puppy. One of the most people always ask me about dog food, and one of the most important things for me as someone that handles and trains search dogs is, believe it or not, their poo. I really I need to have a dog that does a solid poo. And that's because of the types. When you're searching places, and some of our dogs have searched some government buildings and maybe the directors' boxes in football grounds and this kind of thing. The last thing that you need is a runny poo. So having solid stools is, and it might sound to people watching this, it might sound really stupid, but one of the most important things for me is a solid stool, something that I can pick up, and in some cases I can pick up without anyone knowing that it's ever happened. Again, as what John has said, from day one, when we have puppies, and even when we get puppies in, we feed them Burns puppy, and it's all down to to how much they're fed. It's all down to their individual needs, and what we're doing with them.
Brilliant.
Yeah. I think general foods that are highly digestible. So not only do you expect a well-formed stool, but you expect to have less of it because the food's very digestible. We don't add fibre to anything. The fibre that the dog needs is in the ingredients. For example, in the brown rice, and we don't use sugar beet pulp, for example, which is a very common ingredient in pet foods because it's cheap. but it creates a bulky stool. So, and it's not a funny thing to talk about at all. It's just as important for pet owners that it's easy to clean up after the dog and not too much of it. You don't really want to be following your dog around with a wheelbarrow and a shovel, do you? So, and there's an important environmental element to that too. With a lot of dogs in the UK, 8 million of them or so, there's just a lot of poo, and as little as possible it has to be a good thing, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you again, it's something, this is my job, so I do this every day, watch my dogs all the time. Our dogs are fed twice a day, and all of the dogs will do two poos a day, and I can almost tell you, at what time they're going to do it. So it's, but again, it's very important. I've had a few. I remember actually searching a very well-known football ground a couple of years ago, and there's a row of boxes where companies pay lots of money to have guests and eat meals and watch the football. And I had a call on my mobile phone. I was in another part of the football ground. A call from another handler whose Labrador had diarrhea in one of the boxes. And and this was maybe an hour before the guests start arriving. So, and it wasn't a laminate floor; it was a carpet. So you can only imagine. But I don't know what he fed his dog, but thankfully that wouldn't. That it has happened with me. But I can, as I say, I can normally pick them up quite discreetly, and no one knows it's ever happened. So.
What sort of tips would you give for people on how much to feed their puppy? How do they work out how much they should be feeding a day for their puppy?
Well, before I started in this pet food business, when I was working in my vet practice, a client would say to me, "How much do I feed?" And I would say, "Well, read what it says on the bag and then ignore it." So it's not quite like that, is it? But I think that gives an indicator of how important. There's 8 million dogs here in the country. They're all different, so you cannot legislate to say how much each individual needs. The pet owner has to take some responsibility for that. And balance is, Stuart mentioned that earlier. The balance between what you give and what the puppy needs is the key here. And sometimes that can be quite difficult to get it right. Calls for a little bit of variation, perhaps, and experimentation. So it's not absolutely straightforward. You can't rely on a chart for that.
With them sort of fussy puppies or puppies that are too hungry, should you adjust their feeding amounts?
Well, I often say with fussy dogs, people say to me, being a vet is more difficult than a doctor because the animal can't tell you can't communicate, but they can, just not verbally. And a fussy puppy is actually telling you, not telling you that you don't like the food, telling you that I'm not hungry, and you shouldn't really encourage a puppy to eat when it isn't hungry. So you've probably been overfeeding if the puppy becomes fussy. That's almost always a consequence of overfeeding. The hungry dog's a bit more difficult, I think. Some dogs you could probably feed them all day long and they still would want more. And I'm a bit like that myself. I'm always looking for something to eat without stopping to think, am I actually hungry here? So here we have to exert a bit of discipline and feed according to how the dog or the puppy is progressing. And we have to watch for signs like putting on too much weight or they get a bit loose, for example, with their stools. And if they start to smell and get discharges from their eyes, so on, these are signs possibly of overfeeding. So it'd be nice to feed a dog as much as it wants, but a greedy dog, sometimes quite difficult to deal with, I feel. You anything to add to that, Stuart?
No, it is. I mean, typically the dogs that I have here are not very foodie dogs. They're cockers and springers. The only real issue I have here with one of my dogs is Cooper, who's a search dog. He's a Labrador. And I can put bowl after bowl down for him, and he will eat. So yeah, and again, going back to John said, you shouldn't make a puppy or expect it to eat it. If it doesn't want to eat, then it won't. Yeah, it's
yeah. So, well, one other thing I'd like to add to that discussion about feeding them out, the puppies, when they start to eat poo, then there's a lot of theories about why dogs do that, whether because are there nutrients in the poo, or are they still hungry, and so on. To me, this is an example of a depraved appetite. It's probably caused by a minor upset to the digestive system. That's my view, and in my experience, it can be caused by overfeeding. So if the puppy is doing that or that way inclined, chances are that there's a dietary issue and that you may have to cut back in the amount of food to deal with that. So it's a disgusting thing, but it's not a mystery, I feel. I think it's a dietary issue.
It's quite a common problem, isn't it? Yeah. Have you got any tips for people for rewards when they're training their dog? Should they be giving them lots of treats when they're training, or is there other alternatives that people can use? Either of you, I think you've probably both got strong views.
No, yes, I'm not. Sorry, I'm going first in this. I'm not a dog trainer, but I have brought up dogs, and I've hardly ever used treats at all. I find the only reward that I've ever really used is congratulations, and just making a fuss of the dog can be enough. There's a danger of giving too many treats, or that everything that the dog does is based on getting a reward, especially a treat. So too many treats cause issues with, health issues, putting on too much weight, for example. Stuart, you're the expert. You tell us what you think.
Well, all of my training is reward-based training, and I prefer, if possible, to reward with a tennis ball or a Kong or some sort of toy. But having said that, I do get the odd dog that likes to be rewarded with a treat. I've got one here at the moment, actually, and he's very responsive to being to his training and being rewarded with a treat. The only thing that you have to then factor in is you have to weigh that you can't feed him the same as you would if you weren't giving him any treats. So you have it's a balance, but again, going back to the Labrador that I've got, he's a fantastic search dog. But a Labrador, if I trained, I'm lucky that he likes to be trained using a Kong, and just nothing in the Kong, just purely, when he's doing a search and he finds something, he gets rewarded with a Kong, and we have lots of play and lots of fuss and praise, and and that's great. He would equally like to be rewarded with food, but if you look at some of the premises that I search, yesterday I was in Hereford, and I was having to search a couple of shops, and some of those shops had delicatessen counters. So if you're training a dog with treats, and you're then taking a dog into a shop with a delicatessen counter, and you're expecting him to search, and there's all of this stray offcuts of meat all over the floor and counter. So I try not to encourage, training with treats. I know, some people Some people like to train with treats, and some dogs are, I will agree, motivated more by being rewarded with treats than with toys. But I try to stay away from from treat rewards with food if possible.
I think it's a good point, because we want to train our dogs positively, but you automatically just think about treats, don't you? And a lot of people forget that there's other ways to train your dog without having to give them lots of extra treats then.
Yes, and there are, well, Bern, you do treats, don't you? There are some treats that you do which I use, and yes, but I think all too often people are probably a bit too keen to give food rewards to their dogs, and they should look at sort of at other alternatives, definitely.
We'll go on to, we just wanted to add this in because it's been such a big problem that dog owners have been facing recently and worrying a lot of people about dog theft. And do you have any tips for anyone?
Well, I think the important thing is that from as young an age as possible, the puppy should be microchipped, and that has to be a deterrent or a need to getting a puppy back. It has to be microchipped, and microchips should be kept up to date. Most important, I think. Other things are probably quite obvious. Don't let your dog out of your sight, and be sure that the dog is trained to come back to you when you call rather than disappearing. So these are a couple of basic points, I feel. Big problem, isn't it, really? But I met a friend out walking recently, and she was carrying a set of secateurs in her pocket as a defence. I think it's a bit risky, isn't it, carrying an offensive weapon when you're out a walk? But there you go. So, but it's definitely a serious concern, isn't it? Puppies are so valuable now.
Yeah, this is a really sort of hot topic at the moment, and one that really concerns me hugely. And it's I know it's when it sort of started last year. People were saying that I think the Cocker Spaniel was one of the most desirable sort of breeds to be stolen. But looking at things now, it's any breed basically. And I was only reading a couple of days ago about a 70-year-old lady who had been out walking her 11-year-old pug, and she'd been threatened by a man in a balaclava, and had her 11-year-old pug stolen. I don't want to worry people, but dog owners, should be really on their guard, because this doesn't seem to be a problem that's going away. I've got my own views on why it's happening. The price of puppies has gone up massively, and yeah, I've still, in the last couple of weeks, I've still seen dogs tied up outside supermarkets and shops. So I'd really advise, it doesn't matter what breed it is and whether or how old it is, I really advise against people not leaving their dog outside a shop whilst they're doing their shopping, because it's really not safe. And I also people are going in, people will break into a car. If you take a dog, your dog out with you, and you leave it in the car and to pop into a shop or whatever, thefts have occurred where people have stolen dogs, broken into the car and stolen them. So, that's another tip. I've got hundreds of tips. If you live on a property, maybe on a street, or you've got a garden or yard facing out onto the street, don't leave your dog out in the front yard or the front garden where people can see it from the street. Something else that's quite worrying is I've recently been told here, actually in Carmarthenshire, individuals who are looking to steal dogs have actually been sitting outside pet shops, because people like to take their dogs into pet shops, and people have been subsequently people have been waiting up outside shops, watching who goes into the pet shops with dogs, then following them home and observing, where they live, what type of property they have. And this has happened. The dogs have been stolen at a later date. The same with vets as well. I've heard in Carmarthenshire, I've heard of vehicles linked to dog theft being parked up across the street or down the road from veterinary practices, watching what people are taking into the vets, and again following them home. So I don't want to cause panic or get people worried, but anyone with a dog should be on their guard, really, and you need to be. I mean, I'd be devastated if I had a dog stolen, and hopefully my advice, will, there's plenty of other advice out there, but certainly those are a few tips that I have.
Yeah, I think it's important that dogs are valuable items now, aren't they? And we need to treat them like they are valuable to us and not just sort of leave them out of our sight, really, like we do with other valuable items.
Yeah.
We've got quite a few questions coming through, so I think we'll sort of close the session down and move on to the questions. So thanks everyone for listening. We've got quite a few questions that we'll just go through. If anyone does have any questions that we don't get a chance to answer, please get in touch with our nutrition team. We've got the free nutrition helpline, so you can email info@burnspet.co.uk. You can live chat on the website. We can also reply on Facebook as well, so we'll go through your messages, and you can call the helpline number as well. For any of out there who do have a puppy at the moment, we've also got our Burns Puppy Club. So if you go on the website, the Burns website, burnspet.co.uk, there's information on there, and you can sign up your puppy and get some food and lots of information along the way. If you want to find out more information about Stu as well, and BWY Canine, you can find some over on Twitter or Instagram, and it's at BWY Canine. Canine, letter K, number 9, like the police dogs. So now it's time for some questions and answers. So we've got one here. My puppy is 9 months old. Shall I move him on to adult food now, or is it better to stick to puppy food?
I think it depends a lot on, first of all, on the size of the dog. Smaller breeds, I think they should be on to adult food by the time they're 9 months old, whereas large breeds, German Shepherds and so on, probably delay it until from 9 to 12 months or so. But a lot depends on how they're doing. If the puppy is growing well, isn't overweight and is thriving, then it might tend to stay on the puppy food a little bit longer. But as a general guide, I'd be thinking small breeds onto adult food around the 6 months mark, large breeds 12 months or so, 9 to 12 months. There's no hard and fast rule about this. Again, as I said before, every individual is an individual and should be treated so.
This is quite a big topic in itself. I know John has some views on this. What are your thoughts on the current raw feeding trend?
Well, it's certainly very popular, and it's a sore subject with me, really. I feel that I could talk about this for quite a while. It's not something I believe in. Puppies, if somebody said to me 15,000 years ago that dogs are used to eating the wild animals who should be fed accordingly, then that might have held some weight. But over the 15,000 years of domestication, dogs have adapted to eating the same food as humans, basically, which tends to be cereal based. For millennia now, humans have been using grains and vegetables as their main foods, and dogs have adapted to that, and probably in a very short time after domestication. It's a choice that people make, and that's fair enough in a way, but the arguments made to justify it, I'm afraid, they just don't stack up. But there are two problems associated with raw feeding. It's been established that there's a potential risk to health. Raw feeding, people don't eat raw meat, for example, because of the health risks, and the same thing applies to dogs and cats, that bacteria can be disseminated into the environment, and that can cause a hazard to family members, especially vulnerable ones. So that's one potential disadvantage. Another disadvantage that's been demonstrated is that feeding raw food to pets increases bacterial resistance to antibiotics. Now that's the next big problem health-wise that we have coming up for us: bacterial resistance to antibiotics. And raw feeding actually encourages that, so something to be thought about carefully for that reason.
We've got another question. There's lots of questions, by the way, about how great their dog's poo is on Burns. Lots of comments. There's a question there saying, talking about balance, is it okay to add ingredients to supplement the dog's diet, such as vegetables, yogurt, or meat?
Well, I was going to say it depends what the supplements might be. When I first started with my food, it said on the packaging on the bag, you can feed vegetables as and when you choose. And the vet said to me, "Oh, does that mean it's a complete food or is it not a complete food?" So I took that recommendation off. Vegetables tend to be fine at all times, really. So supplementing with meat, and you mentioned yogurt. Not a fan of dairy foods, really. I think that sometimes dogs can have an intolerance to that, as can humans, of course. Meat, that might upset the balance a little bit. If you've got a healthy dog, it's not quite so important to be strict. If you have a health issue which you're trying to deal with, I think you have to be really careful and not add meat to the diet. But vegetables tend to be all right all the time, really.
Yeah, we often recommend them for dogs that are being quite greedy, don't we, to help fill them up a bit more.
Good point, too. Yes, good point.
There's a question here. My puppy's been nipping a lot, and I'm worried that it'll turn into something worse if he doesn't stop. How can I stop him from doing this?
Nipping?
Nipping, yeah, like when they're sharp little teeth, haven't they?
You go first. You go.
Thanks, John. Well, it depends. It depends how old the dog is. If they can come back with some more information, exactly how old the dog is, what breed it is, and also, has the person that's asked this question, have they had a dog before? Puppies nip. It is something that's that does stop eventually, but yeah, I mean, I actually get asked that question quite a lot, and the reason I ask whether they've had a dog or not before is because to someone that's never had a dog before, a puppy nipping is doesn't seem right, but it is quite a natural thing for a puppy to do. So I would probably just advise, getting something for it to chew. Perhaps its teeth are obviously it's still growing and developing. So get some sort of toy perhaps for it to play with. But unfortunately, it is something that it's when a dog gets to 12 months and it's still not nipping but biting. That's when you've got to worry. But hopefully it's quite a young dog, and this nipping is a phase that pups go through.
Yeah.
I feel it's something ought to be fairly actively discouraged, because what starts off as a plaything, or as you just mentioned, something that puppies do naturally, it can become something that becomes a habit, really, and it can become a nuisance if the puppy is allowed to do things that it's not desirable. That can become a regular feature of things unless it's taught not to.
There's another question.
Just my attitude here is just think what you would do if it was a child. If it's something you let a child do all the time, and if the answer is no, then probably you shouldn't be allowing the puppy to do it either.
I think the lady has just come back, actually. I can see the comment there. 15-week-old cockador has been allowed to walk out this week for the first time. We live quite rurally, so he's not had the opportunity to meet any other dogs. The few that he has met have been met by him barking and some growling. Will this improve with continued socialisation? How do we help feel comfortable and be polite? So 15 weeks old, it is still something that, but as John says, you want to start discouraging, nipping, and meeting other dogs is really important. I have a dog here at the moment. I've actually taken on 2 dogs that were lockdown dogs. And one of them is very good with other dogs. One of them is not so good. And during the lockdown, this dog hasn't met many people, hasn't met many other dogs. So he hasn't got manners. He hasn't got many manners when it's when other dogs are concerned, and people. So as the lady says, 15-week-old, so cockador, I presume that's a cocker crossed with a Labrador. So it's not going to be a small dog, but yeah, you need to start at 15 weeks old. It is something that, as I say, that puppies do, but you don't want it to develop into a full-on bite, and you don't want to allow the dog this nipping to eventually turn into a dominant thing. So you need to nip it in the bud, really.
Hopefully some of the training classes will get back on soon, and that's going to really help things, isn't it? I think a lot of dog trainers are still working as well if people do need help. I think dog trainers can still help people out.
I think one thing that could be helpful is if a person has got friends with dogs, if you can arrange to meet up with them and these dogs, and these arranged meetings so that the people who are on the wrong end of this behaviour know what to expect, and all the dogs can get used to each other then.
Yeah.
In a controlled way.
Yeah.
We'll take one more question here. Hopefully it's just quite a short one. It says, what are your views on soaking dry food? And my vet said to feed it dry because it would clean her teeth, which makes no sense to me. Eating dry biscuits has never left my teeth feeling clean. Should I feed it dry or should it be soaked?
Yes, well, short questions usually have long answers. But from a feeding perspective, it doesn't make any difference, really. And I quite agree with whoever said that feeding, I think, is a myth that dry biscuit cleans the teeth. It doesn't work for humans, and I don't think it works for dogs either. I've seen plenty of evidence of that anyway. Dogs with tooth tartar when they're fed on dry food. So it's a matter of preference, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually, believe it or not, people ask me. I obviously feed birds, and I always use some warm water, and just leave it for a little bit, swill it around, and you've got you believe it or not, you will have a gravy. It makes its own gravy. So I always add warm water to our especially for puppies. I really soak it. But even the adult dogs now, I do add some warm water, swill it around a bit, that's just my input.
It's
Yeah,
just
I'm sure.
personal preference, really, isn't it? And what the dog prefers.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all we've got time for then today. We'll definitely have to do this again though, because I think we've covered some interesting points there. So thanks to John and to Stu, and thank you to Wales Week as well, who have kind of hosted this event. And thanks everyone for listening and for all your questions. We'll get back to as many of you as we can now as well after the session. We'll just write back to you. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.